The next section that we're studying is James 5, verses 7 through the end of the chapter, which is verse 20. Um, so far in James, we've been talking about the false gospel of Gnosticism, which has the same doctrines that you find in Christianity. Um, the first big problem was in chapter 2 was faith without works. Along with that, in chapter 2, we saw the idea of breaking the Torah, meaning that you're not following all of the commands of the Torah. Um, Another issue that was brought up in James is the idea that righteousness is not possible. And we see that that is false. Another problem is the wealth problem, the pyramid scam, where you're trying to make money on your money by oppressing other people. We have to get away from that economic system, and this is where we want to. We're not just a religious organization. We are an organization that helps each other in everything, including economics. So we want to build our own economic system within the disciples so that we can help each other produce things that helps us to have money so that we can operate, as opposed to getting donations from anybody that we can get a hold of and using a pyramid scam. We also talked about the mixture of input issue, that we have to get away from the world, and we're in the process of doing that on the path. When we get into Ephesians, we're going to complete that part of the process and have complete input from the world. But right now we're growing in that, and the particular area that we're growing in the Galatians level is the area of guarding the tongue. And this means that if you are making a concerted effort to do Thanksgiving, that's going to influence your inner dialogue and cause you to have more good input and less bad input. Now let's get into James 5. In verses 7 through 11, he's talking about patience and perseverance, staying on the path, in other words. This whole section from 7 down to 20 is really dealing with the issue of the path. Gnosticism rejected the path because the path is training you to live righteously. And Gnosticism wants to include certain sins and say that that's okay, and that's what you're seeing a lot within Christianity even today, where they're being more and more inclusive of sins within the church. But the path is designed to train us in righteousness. And the path is not a simple thing. It's not easy. It's not short. It's not a shortcut. And that's what Gnosticism was all about, was getting a shortcut. Something where you could get a weekend seminar and you'd be good to go. But no, this is a long process of changing us to become righteous. But if you don't have to become righteous, then you can take a shortcut. But you're not going to get the fruit that we're after if you do that. In verses 13 through 18, it's talking about the power of the righteous man, and it brings up Elijah, who actually prayed for a drought for 3.5 years. And then when the time came, he prayed for the rain, and it came. This kind of power is what we're after. When you look in Revelation at the two witnesses, the kind of power that they have, this does not come to unrighteous people. This comes to people who are representing God correctly by living righteously. And you only live righteously by completing the path. He also mentions in this section the idea that we're supposed to come to the elders if we're sick and have them pray for us. Why would we do that? Well, the baby believers that are in the group, they of course can pray for sickness, and they can get their prayers answered sometimes. But the power of a righteous person is greatly multiplied. And as baby believers, we're not very righteous. We are continuing to sin periodically. And as a result, we don't have that kind of power. And so that's why he says, come to the elders. Now, the elders is talking about the apostles. We don't have any apostles at the moment, but we are hopefully going to finish this course and become apostles, and that's what we will do. We will be able to stand in the gap for our disciples as they're growing with our righteous prayers that are very powerful. Then in verse 19 through 20, I'm going to read this. This is a very odd verse. My brothers, if one of you stray from the path of truth. Now, they're mentioning it right there, the path. And anyone convert him from his error. Let him know that he who turns the sinner from the error of his way is talking about path, will restore his soul from death and will cover the multitude of his sins. See, this is not talking about walking an aisle one night. This is not talking about initial faith. This is not talking about initially turning. This is talking about walking down the path. The problem is that this person is not continuing on the path, and so we have to help him along, and that's what we do in the congregation. Congregation is there. If it's operating according to the instructions of 1 Corinthians, all of the people in the congregation are there to help you grow and to stay on the path. And it takes a lot of patience and perseverance, as we read at the beginning of this section. This is not something that is easy, because it takes a long time. And so when we talk about straying from the path and converting, what we're talking about is helping him to stay on the path for a long period of time in order to become righteous. So the multitude of sins that we're talking about is all of the various sins that this guy commits periodically. That's going to go away when he eventually becomes a righteous person. As a righteous person, he's not going to be doing those sins periodically. Additionally, he's going to be an apostle, which means that he's going to go out and disciple other people and cover their sins. So that's going to be a huge amount of sins being taken care of by doing the path. Now, I mentioned to you earlier in the path about Yeshua's model, about how he went out and trained 12 guys. He spent 3 years of his ministry and then died and went away just discipling those 12 guys. And it's a 3-year course. The first year gets you to apostle, where you get sent out, and the second year you're training your guys, and you need questions answered. In the third year, you're going to have apostles of your own that you need to coordinate and work with correctly. And so this is a 3-year program. It's going to take us more than 3 years because of our handicaps. But the whole point is that he spent his time getting these 12 guys going. And what did they do? They went out in teams of 2 and set up their own little groups. So now you've got 6 groups of 12. That's 72. Now he sends out the 72 at the end of the 2nd year. They go out in teams of 2. Now you've got hundreds, okay, after this. And if you start multiplying it out, you can, if you continue in that fashion, you can evangelize the 6 billion people in this world in 13 years. Okay, so now we're talking about a multitude of sins being taken care of. Okay, as opposed to training up one guy to be an evangelist, and he goes out and gets 12 guys or gets 500 people to walk an aisle every week. Those guys are not becoming righteous, so we're not helping them to start with. But secondly, if you just counted those 500 guys a week, it would take forever, thousands of years to do 6 billion people. And by that time, you'd have a lot more people in the earth. So you'd never get there. Multiplication, not addition, is the key. And this passage here is telling us, stay on the path. It's hard. It takes a long time. You've got to work every step of the way, and you got to keep going. You got to help each other to stay on the path. You've got to help each other to keep going. Okay? But eventually, you're going to be a righteous apostle with the power of Elijah so that you can do God's work in this world. There's going to be a lot of opposition to this. Satan does not want this. He is happy about Christianity in the state that it is. He's happy about those folks because they're all going to hell. Why? Because they're not living righteously. And they're telling other people that it's impossible to live righteously. Okay? And they're telling other people there is no path to get to righteousness. So all of these errors are being corrected by the path. And as we go forward in the path, together, helping each other to continue on, we are moving towards righteousness. We're dealing with certain sins at each level where we are moving there, and we're going to get there. And the path is going to take us to it. And it's difficult to see it because it takes a long time. It's not something that I can talk about in a seminar on a weekend and everybody's up to snuff. It's something that builds, okay? And it goes slowly and slowly, but eventually it gets there, as opposed to not going anywhere, which is what we see all around us. And we don't want to perpetuate that kind of a thing. We want to provide an alternative for people. People look around and what do they see? They see Christianity, they see Judaism, they see these other religions, they see atheism, they see everybody has got a high divorce rate, everybody is in a mess, and so what is their alternative? They don't have one. Until we get this thing going and we start sending out apostles with doing miracles, they don't have an alternative. So what we're doing right now, just plodding along, growing on the path, is what Yeshua did with his disciples that first year, plodding along, growing on the path, everybody having problems. Oh, I want you to go out and feed those 5,000 people. What? We can't do that. We're worldly. Okay? These disciples, they were a mess, right? And we're a mess. We don't have the faith that we need. We don't have anything going for us. But one thing. We're plodding along on the path, and eventually we're going to get there. Okay? So, the last section in James 5 is dealing with the error of ignoring the path. Okay? So, the path is very, very important. That's what's going to get us to righteousness. That's what's going to get us to the power of being an apostle. And that's what's going to get a lot of people out of sin.